Let me tell you something. I have been doing this for a long time. I have watched politicians rise and I have watched them fall. And I have learned, sometimes painfully, not to say the words out loud. Because every time someone said them about this man, they were wrong. Every time someone counted him out, he found a way back. He survived 2 impeachments. He survived a criminal conviction. He survived an assassination attempt. He survived losing the White House in 2020 and came roaring back in 2024 like the rules of political gravity simply did not apply to him. So I want you to understand the weight of what I'm about to say, because I am not saying it lightly. I am not saying it for clicks. I am not saying it because it feels good, although I will admit a little part of me does feel good saying it. Donald Trump is done. Not done in the sense that he'll disappear tomorrow. Not done in the sense that his base will suddenly wake up and see what we see. Not done in the way that we hoped after January 6th or after the Access Hollywood tape or after any of the dozen moments over the last decade where the political world held its breath and thought, surely this is it. No. Done in a different way. Done in the structural way. Done in the way that history will look back on this moment and say, that was where it turned. That was the beginning of the end of the Trump era. And I believe that with everything I have, let's start with the numbers. Because the numbers don't lie, even when the man himself does. His approval rating right now sits at 37%, according to Pew Research. 37%. And before you shrug and say, well, he's always had low approvals, let me walk you through why this time is different. When he was at 37 inches his first term, he still had the economy working for him. People hated the tweets. They were uncomfortable with the chaos, but they looked at their 401k and they shrugged. Not now. Right now, the economy is actively working against him. Job losses, rising gas prices, a stock market that has been more volatile than a teenager's mood. The very people who came back to him in 2024 because they were tired of Biden's inflation are now looking at their grocery bills, looking at their gas pumps, and asking themselves what exactly they got for their vote. And it's not just the overall number. Look at where the erosion is happening. Only 27% of Americans say they support all or most of his policies and plans. 27%. That is down from 35% when he took office just over a year ago. And here's the part that should terrify every Republican running for anything in November. That drop has come almost entirely from within his own party. Republicans are losing faith in Donald Trump, not Democrats. Not independents, though we'll get to them. His own people are looking at what he has done, and they are shaking their heads. The Pew data on confidence is even more devastating. On every single presidential quality they measured, leadership, mental fitness, physical fitness, picking good advisors, respecting democratic values, ethical conduct, Americans expressed more doubt than confidence. More Americans are not at all confident that Trump acts ethically than are extremely or very confident. That number is 60% not confident, 21% very confident. Let me say that again. 60% of Americans have little or no confidence that their president acts ethically. That is not a number you recover from. That is not a blip. That is a verdict. And then there's the moment that I think, when we look back, we will identify as the hinge point of this presidency. February 20th, 2026, the day the Supreme Court of the United States, in a 6-3 decision that crossed every ideological line you could draw, told Donald Trump that his signature economic policy, the tariffs that he called the most beautiful word in the English language, the tariffs that he promised would fund his entire agenda, the tariffs that he staked his economic reputation on, were illegal, unconstitutional. Done. Chief Justice John Roberts, a man that Donald Trump appointed to the bench, joined by Justices Gorsuch and Barrett, 2 more of Trump's own picks, looked at the IEEPA tariffs and said, and I'm paraphrasing here because I want you to feel the weight of this, those 2 words in the law simply cannot bear such weight. The law doesn't mention tariffs. It doesn't mention duties. And no president before Trump had ever tried to read it that way. Because no president before Trump had ever been willing to abuse emergency powers so brazenly, so recklessly, with so little regard for the constitutional structure that holds this entire system together. Trump found out about the ruling while he was meeting with governors at the White House. He read a note that was passed to him, said aloud, and I quote directly, "That's a disgrace," and then left the room, walked out on the governors, on the meeting, because that is who he is. That is how he handles defeat. He called a press conference and said he was ashamed of certain members of the court, ashamed that they didn't have the courage to do what was right for the country. He was talking about the justices he himself put on the court, the people he bragged about appointing. He was ashamed of them because they followed the Constitution instead of following him. Let that land for a second. The fiscal damage from this ruling is staggering. We are talking about a $175 billion refund liability. The government illegally collected over $160 billion from American businesses under those tariffs. That money has to go back the budget hole that the tariffs were supposed to fill. An estimated $1, $4 trillion over 10 years, that's gone. The administration is now scrambling to replace it through Section 301 investigations, through Section 122 emergency powers that expire in 150 days right before the midterms, through any legal mechanism they can find to keep the trade war alive. But the era of the unilateral executive tariff is over. The Supreme Court killed it. And without it, the entire economic architecture of the second Trump term collapses. Now let's talk about Iran, because this is where it gets truly historically ugly. On February 28th, the United States and Israel launched what the administration called Operation Epic Fury, joint strikes on Iran. Strikes that killed Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Strikes that also killed 6 American service members when Iran retaliated. Strikes that have plunged the Middle East into a new war, stranded American travelers, rattled global markets, and launched yet another chapter in the long, tragic story of American military adventurism in that region. I want to be precise about what happened here, because the administration has not been the original justification. The reason Trump went on television and told the American people we were striking Iran was that Iran was preparing missile attacks on U.S. bases. That was what he said. That was the predicate for war. And then, days later, Pentagon officials told congressional staffers there was no evidence of imminent Iranian strikes. None. The intelligence did not support the claim. Trump then shifted to saying Iran was building missiles that could soon reach the American homeland, and U.S. intelligence assessments directly disputed that conclusion, finding that Tehran is years away from developing intercontinental ballistic missiles and has shown no intent to develop them. So we are at war with Iran. 6 Americans are dead, hundreds more are injured. The stated justifications have changed and shifted and collapsed, and 59% of Americans oppose the war. 59%. You have to go back to the early days of the Vietnam War to find a military engagement that unpopular from the jump. In October 2001, 87% of Americans supported the strikes in Afghanistan. 87. George W. Bush had a 90% approval rating after September 11th. Donald Trump launched a war and his approval rating went down. It went down. The internal party fracturing over Iran is something I genuinely did not expect to see this soon, and I think it tells you something profound about where we are. Non-MAGA Republicans, your suburban Republicans, your traditional conservatives, your people who voted for Trump because they thought he'd be transactional and pragmatic, only 27% of them approved of the Iran strikes. 27. And in the MAGA ecosystem itself, the influencers and figures who spent years defending every single thing this man did, people like Andrew Tate, people like Nick Fuentes, they turned on him. They said Trump sold them out. They said nobody wants this war. Now, I'm not going to pretend I have anything in common with those people politically, but when the MAGA internet is calling the MAGA president a sellout, something has broken. Something structural has cracked. Trump himself, who ran in 2024 on a platform of ending endless wars, who attacked Biden and the Democrats relentlessly over Afghanistan, who promised his voters he would not entangle America in new foreign conflicts, is now calling the war an excursion. That's his word. Excursion. Like it's a school trip. Americans are in a shooting war in the Middle East. Service members are coming home in flag-draped coffins, and the President of the United States is using the word excursion because he knows, on some level, that he made a promise he has now shattered. And you know who knows it most acutely? His voters in the Rust Belt, the people in Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan who came back to him in 2024 because they were tired of feeling economically left behind. They did not vote for another Middle East war. They voted for America first, and now they're watching the administration spend political capital and military resources on a conflict in Iran while the factory down the road is laying people off, and the tariffs that were supposed to bring manufacturing home just got declared illegal by the Supreme Court. Let me paint the midterm picture for you, because I think it is more alarming for Republicans than almost anything we've seen in modern political history. Democrats currently hold a 5.3 percentage point advantage in generic congressional polling. That is a swing of nearly 8 points from 2024. Now think about what that means structurally. 21 House Republicans won their seats in 2024 with margins of less than 8 points. 21 seats. Republicans can only afford to lose 4 seats in the House before they lose the majority. 21 members are in the kill zone, and the average swing toward Democrats in special elections since Trump's second term began has been well into double digits. Independents, the voters that Trump managed to peel away in 2024, the voters who made the difference in his victory, have moved dramatically. 61% of independents oppose the Iran war. Only 15% of independents say they'll vote Republican in the 2026 midterms. 15%. In 2024, Trump won independents. He campaigned on being the candidate who could win across party lines. And now 3 out of every 4 independents are walking away. The math simply does not work for the Republican Party. There is no scenario in which you win a midterm election with 15% of independents. There is no path. The map doesn't exist. And let's talk about what happens if Democrats win the House, because I think people need to understand what's at stake beyond the politics. If Democrats take the House in November, they get subpoena power. They get committee chairmanships. They get the ability to conduct real oversight of this administration. And let me tell you, there is no shortage of things to investigate. There is the question of the Iran war's intelligence predicate and whether Congress was properly consulted before military action was taken, which multiple legal scholars say it was not. There is the question of the tariff refunds, $175 billion that the government owes to American businesses, and how and whether that money will actually be returned. There are ongoing questions about the use of Doge, the Elon Musk experiment in government, which the NBC commentary has called a chaotic, ineffective, and ultimately humiliating endeavor that saw the very public fracturing of their relationship. And there are the immigration enforcement actions that resulted in 2 U.S. citizens being killed by immigration officers in Minnesota in January, U.S. citizens dead, at the hands of federal agents operating under this administration's direction. A Democratic House will not let that go. Speaking of Elon Musk, because we should. Because the unraveling of the Trump-Musk partnership is its own kind of political catastrophe for this administration. Musk was supposed to be the symbol of the second term's energy. The tech visionary, the richest man in the world, cutting waste and bringing efficiency to the bloated federal government. It was a story Trump loved to tell. It made him feel modern. It made him feel connected to something beyond his usual base. And it fell apart. Publicly, humiliatingly. The Doge project produced chaos. Mass layoffs that courts kept blocking. Agencies gutted in ways that created real, tangible harm for real people. Systems disrupted, services denied, veterans unable to access benefits, students losing financial aid, federal workers terminated without cause, and then in many cases rehired when courts intervened. And then the friendship itself collapsed. 2 enormous egos who both needed to be the most important man in any room and eventually couldn't fit in the same room anymore. I want to talk about something that I think is underreported but deeply important, which is the psychological dimension of what we're watching. The Pew data found that the share of Republicans who are confident Trump respects the country's democratic values has dropped from 60% to 52% over the last year. Now, 52% is still a majority of his own party, and I'm not suggesting Republicans are suddenly going to become champions of Democratic norms. But that 8-point drop matters because it tells you that even among people who want to believe in him, something is eroding. The cognitive dissonance is becoming harder to maintain. 54% of Americans believe Trump is using his office for personal gain. 70% reject his recurrent mentions of serving a third term. And you might say, well, he's always had numbers like that. But context is everything. When you're winning, when the economy is humming, when you're racking up policy victories, your voters overlook the parts of you they don't like. When you're losing, when the economy is stumbling, when the Supreme Court is striking down your flagship policies and a war you started is killing American service members and the TV shows you promised would be full of winning are full of something else entirely, those same voters start to look at the parts they were overlooking. And they don't like what they see. I want to be honest with you about something. I've been in political commentary for a long time, and I have learned to be careful about triumphalism. It doesn't help anyone. It doesn't move anyone. And there is still a long road between here and November, and a longer road between November and January 2029 when this presidency constitutionally ends. Trump is a lame duck now in the sense that he cannot run again, but lame ducks can still do tremendous damage. He still has the nuclear codes. He still has the executive power of the presidency. He still has a base of support that, while eroded, is not gone. The 37 or 38 or 40% of Americans who still approve of his job performance are real people with real votes and real passion, and dismissing them is a mistake that Democrats have made before and cannot afford to make again. But I said at the beginning that I believe this was the structural turning point, and I want to come back to that. Because what has happened over the last few months is not just a run of bad polls or a rough news cycle. The Supreme Court has drawn a constitutional line around executive power. The highest court in the land, including justices he appointed, told this president that there are things he simply cannot do. That matters beyond this president. That matters for the institution of the presidency itself. Courts have been blocking his actions since day one of his second term, but those were emergency stays, temporary measures, lower court interventions. This was the Supreme Court, fully briefed, fully argued, speaking with finality. No, you cannot do this. And that ruling will stand long after Trump is gone. The Iran war has exposed the central contradiction of Trumpism. He promised his voters America first, no new wars, a foreign policy built on deal-making, not military adventurism, and he launched a war anyway. Without a clear plan, without a coherent justification, without the support of Congress, without public support, without even the support of significant parts of his own base, the war may end. The bombs may stop falling. But the promise is broken in a way that cannot be unbroken. The voters who believed him on foreign policy now have evidence written in the blood of 6 American service members and an unknown number of Iranian civilians that he said one thing and did another. The economy was supposed to be his strongest suit. He won in 2024 on the economy. Inflation, prices, cost of living bring the jobs back. And right now in the first months of 2026, job losses are up, gas prices are up, the stock market is volatile. The tariff policy that was the centerpiece of his economic agenda has been declared illegal. Consumer confidence is declining. And the people who voted for him because of the economy are beginning to feel in a very tangible and personal way that they were sold a story that didn't pan out. None of this means Donald Trump goes quietly. He never goes quietly. He will rage against every setback. He will find someone to blame. The courts, the media, the deep state, China, Democrats, whoever happens to be in front of a microphone when the news is bad. He will claim victory in the middle of defeats. He will reframe catastrophes as strategic genius. That is what he does, and he is extraordinarily good at it, and we should never underestimate it. But here's what I keep coming back to. The political coalition that brought him back in 2024 was built on specific promises. Lower prices, no new wars, America first, strong borders, And in the first 14 months of his second term, prices are not lower. He started a new war. The Supreme Court kneecapped his trade agenda, and immigration enforcement has become so aggressive that federal agents killed 2 American citizens on American soil. The promises and the reality are so far apart that even the most loyal supporters are starting to feel the gap. That gap is where political coalitions go to die. Not in a dramatic moment, not in a single news cycle, gradually, and then all at once. Quietly, in the privacy of a voting booth, people who voted for someone because of what he promised decide that the promises weren't kept, and they either stay home or they vote the other way. That's what the midterms are shaping up to be. Not a wave based on love for Democrats, because God knows the Democratic Party has its own work to do to earn that love, but a wave based on accountability, based on the simple, quiet, devastating political truth that voters gave this man a mandate, and he used it to start an unpopular war, crash his own trade policy in the Supreme Court, preside over a stumbling economy, and govern not for the broad coalition that elected him, but for the narrow, shrinking base that worships him. Donald Trump is done. Not today, not tomorrow, not in a single dramatic moment that will play on cable news on a loop, but done in the way that matters, done in the way that history records. The second term, that was supposed to be his vindication, his legacy, his proof that 2020 was a blip and 2024 was the real verdict, is collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. The Supreme Court has spoken. The polls have spoken. The dead in Iran and in Kuwait have spoken in the most heartbreaking language possible. And in November, the voters will speak. I believe, for the first time in a long time, I truly believe they will be heard.